artificial intelligence will completely transform our world. But what is AI? Why will it affect you? And how can you and your business survive and thrive through the AI revolution? Welcome to AI and You. Here is your host, author, speaker, and futurist, Peter Scott.
Hello, welcome to episode 289, and a very special episode it is. In our grand four-year-old tradition, we are taking our annual look back on the year that has passed and casting an eye forward to the year to come. Sounds very Charles Dickens when I put it that way. Well, no ghosts here, but instead I am joined by two very special people I am proud to have gotten to know. Dan Turchin, who was on episodes 122 and 123, and who is CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform automating HR, and is host of the AI and the Future of Work podcast, which you should listen to and get their excellent newsletter. And also Richard Foster Fletcher, who was on episodes 8 and 9, yes, that long ago, and is the founder and executive chair of MKAI, the Inclusive Artificial Intelligence Community, and leads the MKAI Center for Digital Trust. Richard has advised the United Nations Environmental Program and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and hosts the Boundless podcast. And both gentlemen have been on year-end panels on this show before, Dan in episode 132 at the end of 2022, and Richard in episode 80 at the end of 2021. High time that we had them back here because they have such insightful ideas that serve their clients so well. So let's get right into the panel. Well, here we are on our year-end episode of AI and You, and I am very, very pleased to welcome two of my favorite people to the podcast, Dan Turchin and Richard Foster Fletcher, because not just of their expertise and everything they know, but especially because their hearts are in the right place 100%, and we need that so much in this business right now. Gentlemen, welcome to the episode. We're recording a couple of weeks before the end of the year, so if anything happens between December 12th and December 29th, you're not responsible for having failed to acknowledge that in the next 30 minutes. And I'd like to kick off with just looking back over 2025 and say, what is it that's happened in these last 11 and a half months that surprised you? Something that you wouldn't have predicted in a 2024 predictions show. Dan.
I'm happy to start. And Peter and Richard, just a pleasure to have this opportunity. I'm completely going to go rewrite my bio after this to say that I am one of Peter Scott's favorite people. So, gosh, you're not going to be able to get my head out of the room. My ego's so big, but Peter, Richard, just pleasure to reconnect. Gosh, there was so much that was surprising and I'd even say encouraging. As both of you, I'm an AI enthusiast, so I'm going to think about the positive side of what happened that impacted humanity from the perspective of the technology. I'll share three thoughts, just as maybe an opportunity to kick off the conversation. One, this was a year when employees won. And despite what you might read about MIT and 95% of projects failing in the enterprise, it's wrong. I interact with leaders every day around the world, and the theme that I hear, there's a real appetite for using AI to make humans better, give them time back at work, help them be more productive. That is the predominant theme. So employees won. The second category that I'd say surprised me in 2025 is I wasn't prepared to say this in December of 2025, but creators won. A year ago, I certainly was among many who anticipated that 2025 would be a year of litigation, of adjudicating what AI can and can't do, who owns AI-generated content. I think the courts now have resoundingly said, whether it's with the New York Times or Reddit, or even there's a big announcement today between OpenAI and Disney, the courts have sided with creators and established that the humans behind the content deserve to be compensated for their great work. And then the third thing that has surprised me, maybe in the category of winners and losers, is I'd say we all won. I'd say that this was a year when human ingenuity shocked and surprised me. This global experiment that we've been on, you call it, loosely since ChatGPT launched a couple years ago, but really for a decade or more since we've been talking about neural nets. The scope and scale of what we've been doing exceeds really any project in human history. That the pyramids, the interstate highways, anything you can think about that really just defied what we thought humans could accomplish. This is one of them. Just the fact that we can appreciate for a relatively nominal cost, that's a whole other conversation, but just that the AI infrastructure is working and it is delivering at scale. The data centers are working, the compute clusters are working, we're bringing them on in record time. I think it's worth taking a pause at the end of the year and just saying human ingenuity won this year.
What a really positive message. Thank you. Richard, what about you? And anything happening faster or slower this year than you might have predicted?
Well, first of all, I'm British, so it's categorically impossible for me to be as positive as Dan is about anything, ever. It's not in my DNA. But I say, first of all, it's wonderful to be here with yourselves again and trying to address these difficult and important questions. And I wholeheartedly agree with everything enthusiastically that Dan has stated. And as a user and enthusiast in my own business with AI, every day is a celebration for me of this technology that empowers this quadrant of people who are capable and a bit lazy. And it is, I think, awesome the way that you can sort of scholastically and Socratically, I would say, use AI to enhance your ideas. And I am happy to go hours and hours and hours of doing that. But I wasn't happy to go hours and hours reading reports. But that lends me to where I think, there's less enthusiasm in this, is that I start every day, I think this is incredible for some people and terrible for the rest. And I think the some people is a very small percentage of the people. So that concerns me a lot. Your question about what surprised, I think, this year is, first of all, I'm surprised that people still think that LLMs are as good as they are, even though we see the likes of Jan LeCun exiting and safe superintelligence starting out because there wasn't so much future in LLMs. And I think there's still this misunderstanding that there's an incremental opportunity for LLMs to get better. And I think there isn't. And I think that's inflation of hype, because if you look at nuclear power, for example, it's no better materially than it was in the 1960s. Commercial airliners, the aircraft, they fly slower than they did in the 1960s. We don't just see incremental improvements in technology. That's not how it works. And I think there are severe limitations to LLMs that will affect companies that I think will start to realize the ultimate truth, I think, of 2025, that AI is absolutely incredible, but it's not easy. It was never meant to be easy. And I'll just end with this thought for this section is, when I hear about people talking about AI and how great it is, I don't really believe they're using it. If they were really using it, they would be talking about it with reverence and frustration. They'd be talking about how they're fighting model drift every day and degraded threads and chasing depth when the system wants to go to the gravity of the generic and the consensus all the time, and the grind of trying to get great output from a system that kind of behaves differently every single day. So I only think the truth is they're avoiding all these things so they haven't yet experienced them. So I think we're still in that sort of we're talking about it and we're not really living that from a lot of executives that I hear from anyway. I'll pause there.
I really agree. I think that a lot of people are captivated by the shiny thing, which looks very competent, and most of the time, for certain values of most, is competent, but always looks like it's confident in its answer, and sometimes it is wrong. And I have been experiencing the same frustration over and over again recently. And it is this very jagged, to use Karpathy's word, phenomenon where sometimes it is really, really good and sometimes it is really, really bad. But telling the difference between them is the hard part. Dan, you mentioned MIT. They seem to have created a cottage industry out of publishing downer studies like the one on education, measuring effects on cognitive retention in students and using brain scans to tell that those were down when they were using AI. And yet there are nuances to that, and some guests on a show coming up very shortly after this one are going to take issue with that study. So I think just to contribute my own small part to this, I've been focusing on education. And in the last year, I've been pleasantly surprised by how fast teachers that had no reason to get into technology until AI invaded their space in education have learned some basic AI literacy and become familiar with operation and nuances of the tools. And I see this spreading of AI literacy throughout the population happening really fast. I think the rate at which we're all adapting to this is quite phenomenal. I liken it to back in the 1980s, I actually gave classes on how to use a graphical user interface. Like, here is this thing that's a mouse, and as you move it around on your desktop, this little pointer thing on your screen moves around. I was literally doing that. Now, no one has to give classes on how to close a window, how to open an app. We're just born knowing how to do that. And I think about, well, what are the things that we will be born knowing how to do in AI in a couple of years? And I think that's really interesting to think about what that acculturation of its usage will look like. Richard, to go off what you were just saying and to look forward here, it seems like you might predict that there could be a day of reckoning ahead if large language models fail to deliver the promise that is being invested in them by hyperscalers to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. Do you think that that might happen? Do you think that might come home to roost next year?
I think AI is absolutely capable of delivering the returns that it has to. Although, if you believe that, and you believe it is going to bring in, $1.8 trillion of value by 2030, there is only one way it's bringing that in, and that's going to take a large chunk out of the wage packet of many countries. It's one or the other. Either the share price is inflated and we're going to get a stock price crash, or it's real because they're going to take wages as the return. It's the only prize big enough to warrant the work. You can't spend all this money just to see somebody write an email a bit faster in Outlook. Is it going to collapse? I think there are bubbly signs on there. Oracle's building compute for customers doesn't have with money it's borrowed at high interest rates. That's pretty risky. It must be very interesting working at OpenAI, knowing just what an incredible product you've brought to market. But that doesn't always translate into value because it takes enterprises a long time. But ultimately, I think we've got to ask the right questions, and maybe asking why are enterprises not getting the value out of AI now is the wrong question. Maybe it's how many of these enterprises AI is going to kill and how many new companies like the ones that Dan's formed many times in the past are going to rise up and take their place. Are we asking that?
And Dan, I want to ask about how you have experienced so many people that you talk with that are at the upper echelons of companies that are making big bets on AI. How are they perceiving the biggest of bets that's being made by the hyperscalers in pouring all this money into training and GPU farms, which seems to be creating an economic bubble that is quite divorced from the reality of what AI can and can't do. And yet it may take down the field of AI when that bubble pops, assuming you believe it's going to pop, just through being within the blast radius. Do the people that you talk with, how do they break down in terms of seeing what the value is to their company of AI, irrespective of what might happen in the stock market versus being tethered to the economics that's going so inflationary right now?
I asked almost that same question a few weeks ago to a gentleman named Jeetu Patel, who's the president of Cisco, on AI and the Future of Work, my podcast. And I was really curious to get his answer because of the position that Cisco's in. Cisco's widely credited for building out the infrastructure behind the internet. And as you can imagine, G2 confidently talks about the investments they're making to build out the infrastructure for AI. We could debate using British cynicism or American optimism what will happen to Cisco. It is notable that today, we're taping this on an interesting day, Cisco for the first time hit an all-time high that they haven't seen since 2000. So turns out there is at least a segment of the economy of investors that feel like Cisco or other infrastructure providers may be providing the picks and shovels that are going to be required to satisfy what's really, it appears as of now, an insatiable appetite for the compute required to power new AI services. And if we were to take there's certainly an underside of that argument or of the discussion, but if we were to take the overside, there will be a lot of creative destruction that occurs throughout every economy in every country. But perhaps from a market forces perspective, that's okay. And what we do know is there's a lot of wealth to be generated and a lot of value to be created if every job, if every life, every far reaches of the earth, everyone is impacted by this technology, let's say in the next decade. Let's go beyond what happened in 2025 or even what will happen in 2026. The blast radius will be large. And again, there's an underside and overside, but if we were to take the overside on that argument, it's hard to say that the investment isn't warranted. And certainly, I encourage everyone listening to listen to the discussion with G2, who certainly from a very self-interested perspective, as a representative of Cisco, but you can start to make a case for why in the beginning stages, there is a lot of room for growth. And given everything that MIT has shared and everything that Richard shared about what hasn't happened yet, if we believe that the technology is transformative, there are going to be a lot of winners, whether it's G2 and Cisco or anyone else. I think that the risk is in the infrastructure not performing well, or if we can't come up with the next version of model beyond LLMs, which Richard and I agree vigorously that LLMs are not the end architecture. But if we can solve some of those challenges, I think it's easy to take the over on what the next few years or even decade looks like.
Are either of you seeing any technology that is significantly different from LLMs looking promising on the horizon that you think might come to our attention next year?
Well, I would say no, first of all, because I think we're not in the rational stage, and Dan might have a different answer. I hope he does. But I still see, particularly on X, people are getting fooled, I think, by the technology. So we're not even in a position to discuss the next technology because we're still getting fooled by this one. So people say, oh, well, LLMs are reasoning. It's like, well, they're not reasoning. Just because it says it's reasoning doesn't mean it's reasoning. It's using the same patterns and token prediction to do the reasoning as it is to provide the outputs. Just like autonomous vehicles are not deciding. And when we get the memory infrastructure layer, which I don't know if we'll have time to talk about today, but that's really interesting. There's no concept of memory or forgetting. It can't do either of those two things either. But we keep calling it these things and pretending these things. So in fact, we think we're designing the roadmap of the future just based on calling it things that it is not. And as long as we keep doing that, we're not really going to have a proper roadmap because we're pretending we have one from just mimicking human intelligence, which is not. Well, it is mimicking, but it's not mimicking it in terms of really doing it.
Good insight. Dan?
Yeah, so building on Richard's point, first of all, I think we need to keep reminding the global society that the A is as important as the I. It's artificial. Let's look back a couple years and remember the Blake Lemoine from Google scare. Has AI achieved sentience? Why are we even talking about it as using the language of humans? Let's get beyond that. And then I think we can have a more enlightened dialogue. And I think not just 2026, but the next few years ahead will be characterized by, call it AI jumping off the screen, right? AI entering the real world. And that's where I think that when you look at every human that wasn't maybe born with the benefits that the three of us have, our faculties, our ability to have a conversation like this, I think AI complements or supplements where humans are deficient, whether that's inability to learn, or maybe it's prosthetic limbs, or they've been injured in battle, or to everyone whose back is broken from picking crops in a field for a lifetime. These kinds of things that I think smart limbs and ways to augment the gut biome and really using AI, protein folding like what DeepMind's doing, where we can start to unlock the real challenges that have held back humanity for centuries. To me, that transcends technology. And that's where really we should think about the combination of machines and algorithms as supplementing where humans are deficient. And if you think about the future of technology in terms of infusing or augmenting or enhancing what humans do, not to be the enthusiastic American consistently here, but I think that's where we should start to expect more from AI. And I think that's where we should, as leaders in the field, push the technology to go faster.
Peter, if I may, just a quick note on that. First of all, I try to hang around with as many Americans as possible, Dan, because I love the enthusiasm and I wish we had more of it over here. My goodness, you're very lucky, I think, to live in a country that has the sort of positive enthusiasm that you do. I just want to say, the English cynical thing, the joke, I mean, just to frame that, when I discovered the kind of apps that Claude could code for you within minutes, I was awake till 5 a.m. and I'm staggering around my house just going, I can't believe what I'm seeing. This is phenomenal. Absolutely blows me away. And I love the enthusiasm. My mother has ME, right? Every single day she is fatigued. And science and modern medicine has absolutely no idea how, why, what causes it. Is it brain? Is it gut? Is it blood? Nothing. We're at Victorian level science when it comes to things like that. So absolutely the hope that I have for AI in that area is substantial.
And as a dual citizen, I will lay claim to both ends of this scale. One quick question before we move to a conclusion. The word of the year, according to Macquarie, I think it's pronounced, dictionary, is AI slop. I've been predicting since ChatGPT that the value of content would trend towards zero as it became so easy to generate. And it seems very much we're in that place. I get more newsletters a day than I can read, and yet they all contain things that I want to read and probably should read, and I haven't squared that circle yet. Businesses must be dealing with this on a big scale at the moment, or trying to. Are we going to see this get better or worse in 2026?
I'm happy to start, Richard. Gosh, passion topic, Peter, as you know, that's throwing red meat into the lion's cage. So I think it's an important conversation to be having because I celebrate the fact that we're finally able to label output from AI as slop or whatever the word of the day is that we want to use, because it forces us to recognize that it's an opportunity for humans to be better than AI. And I think it's a reminder that, there will always be room for humans who are better than average to exceed. And we have now officially entered what I call the post-truth era, where I think it's good that we've learned to question the integrity, the source of everything. And perhaps it shouldn't have taken AI to force us to question the source of our information. But I hope that it happens faster, that we start to assume zero trust policy. We assume that everything put in front of us was AI generated. The things that are human generated by exceptional humans will rise to the top. We'll quickly recognize that those are trustworthy. Well, not that all humans are trustworthy, but it's a challenge for those of us who are ambitious and want to be better than AI slop to be that. And it starts with just having a global dialogue about the fact that AI generates mediocre content, that we are better than that version of what gets put in our inbox.
But it's not always mediocre. And that's the tricky part of this. Sometimes and frequently, it is very useful and essential. It's just being able to tell what is the part that we need out of this, whether it's AI generated or human generated, is the thing that I don't think we figured out yet.
It's frequently untruthful, though.
Well, yes. Richard?
The slop thing is so interesting, and I love writing about this. I call it the gravity of the generic. And the most amazing thing is if you ask ChatGPT to explain exactly what AI slop, it tells you, matter of fact, precisely every single thing it does that uses patterns, and they'll be familiar to a lot of listeners now. It'll say, it's not X, Peter, it's Y. It loves these kind of phrases, right? And it knows every single time it does it. So you say to it, you're doing it, so why can't you stop? And it says, I know, because I'm an LLM. I can't not do it. I am a probability machine moving us towards the most probable next token, word, character, code, whatever. And I can't not do that because that's what I am. So it's really interesting to come across a machine that knows the mistakes it's making but can't correct them. So in terms of 2026, I think companies need to be very, very clear. And if they're not, they're behind the game to say, what are the areas where we can get efficiency in our business? What are the areas where efficiency is a waste of time and we should be focusing on reinventing and innovating? And let's pause for 1 second and remember Clayton Christensen quote where he says, companies don't fail because they don't adopt these new technologies. They fail because they adopt them and use them on existing processes. So let's not make that mistake. This is not designed, I'll say it again, to write emails for you faster. So efficiency, innovation, and then the most important thing, protection. Which parts of our business must this thing not touch? What are the sacred cows? What are the things that are brilliant about us? And, remember, there's companies out there who have their logo tattooed on people's bodies. There are people who've got the Nike tick as a tattoo. I mean, you can't do that from efficiency. The people have to love what you do to go to that level. And so AI slop, my final comment would be that AI thinks it can do everything. It can't. It thinks it can get a meeting with a top CEO for you. It thinks it can predict the stock market for you. It thinks, everything like this. So, for example, in my articles, it cannot create an interesting image for the article. It tries, it can't. But it can muse on my article for an extended period of time. And that's brilliant. I say, don't think about the image. Don't write, don't create, don't come up with a prompt. Just tell me what you think as you read this article. And then you read the thinking, and it creates ideas in your head for brilliant images. You go, well, what about that? What about that? And that, I find, leads me to wonderful images. And if you get a chance, check out my newsletter and just have a look at the images. And if you share my joy for that they're trying to capture the metaphor of the writing in this image, it's one of the most joyful things in my life. But AI triggers it, can't create it, but putting it together is something that I couldn't do alone. It can't do alone. But together we can do things that I simply could never have done 3 years ago.
And it can't match your passion. I'll be looking at that for sure, because I need to get better at that. And I think this question of metacognition, that is the place where the difference between the imitation of the thing and the real thing is most apparent in AI. Final question, and to borrow your trope from your podcast, Dan, it's December 2026, and we're having this conversation again. What are some things that you want to have happened by then?
I'll give you one kind of abstract answer and one specific answer. I want us to be saying the conversation about how to make humans better was accelerated by AI. So we're fallible as a species. AI is a technology. It's certainly fallible. And even that, I think, is a use of an inappropriate adjective to describe a technology. It's math and stats at scale. And there are a lot of ways it can help humans. So I want to see that we're having conversations about how to use this technology to help those who are in need of help. And then one specific theme that I hope we're discussing in a year from now, and I hope we do get an opportunity to have a conversation like this in a year, we're going to see the rise of the first AI nation state. And it's not going to happen in 12 months, but we're going to get closer to a point where kind of the geopolitics of AI, I think, lead to a new set of treaties and alliances, and they're based on sharing of access to, large compute clusters, just in a very technological sense. But we start to think about the value of disseminating the technology to benefit every human as being something that requires shared alliances and agreements and kind of an acceleration of regulatory frameworks that I hope emerges from kind of the smallness of talking about arbitrary boundaries and the geopolitics of AI. I hope we're instead talking about a shared appreciation that in order to get where we all would hope to be, to benefit all humans, it forces us to rethink how we engage with other nations. And that's my specific, maybe more of a hope than a prediction, but I hope that's part of the dialogue we're having in a year.
And just to be clear, the citizens of this AI nation state are people, not AIs, right?
Humans. Humans are only.
Yes.
Team
Richard.
human.
Team human. Richard.
I loved hearing Dan's answer there. That was wonderful. And I guess I'd just say simply, I'd like to hear people in 2026 celebrate how hard it is to use AI. And it should be hard. And that's brilliant, because then it means that you can do fantastic things with it that your competitors can't. Isn't that the whole point of these technologies? That it's difficult, and therefore that's how you create competitive advantage. And then I think that's true for this big middle of organizations who haven't really got their heads around it. And Dan's talking to the likes of Cisco, and in some ways they'll be way ahead of the game. Some ways, of course, they won't be, but they're leaders in this space. But there's a lot of companies who are laggards, huge numbers. So I want them to acknowledge that it's hard and then move forward, embracing that. But then to Dan's point, which I'm not quite sure if we're making the same point or not, I'm sure he'll tell me later, is that I guess there's an idea that we'll go from AI for efficiency to AI for innovation. That sort of feels like where this should be going, right? But what if it's not? What if we're not heading towards AI and innovation? We're actually heading for AI and power. And I don't mean electricity, I mean power and control. What if people realize that the real win with AI is how much control and power you can gain with it? And actually, that's far more interesting and valuable than innovation. And we don't even go the direction we ever thought we were going to go.
And I think that very much reflects a common theme of mine, which is that AI is a mirror to our humanity. And you see people doing with it things that tell you far more about them than they do about the technology, how they use it, what they use it for, and whether the results are good for people or bad. AI is neutral. AI is simply the means by which those tendencies are amplified. We have reached the end of this wonderful episode because we have so many things to do, including let's get back to the hot apple cider and the getting around the fireplace with the family and other things that are more important than AI. Dan, Richard, thank you so much for coming on the show, and Happy New Year.
Gents, absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Peter. Well done for this year.
Let's do this again soon, all right?
And that's the end of our panel. In today's news ripped from the headlines about AI, OpenAI published a State of Enterprise AI report. And while it may not come as a shock that it concludes that AI users experience significant benefits and returns on investment, we'll relay some of their findings anyway. The average enterprise worker saves 40 to 60 minutes daily using AI, according to the report. The heavy users of AI save more than 10 hours per week. That is a figure that will turn heads. And those workers consume 8 times more AI intelligence than those not saving any time. 75% of workers report completing tasks they previously couldn't perform at all, like coding, data analysis, or creating custom workflows. Coding-related messages from non-technical workers jumped 36% over the last 6 months as people discovered that they could build things without traditional programming skills. Arresting stuff. Next week, it will be 2026. And to all of you listening out there, have a wonderful celebration and very happy New Year. Also next week, my guest will be Jeff Riley, former Commissioner of Education for Massachusetts and Executive Director and co-founder of Day of AI, a free global education initiative from MIT that helps teachers introduce students to artificial intelligence. That's next week on AI and You. Until then, remember, no matter how much computers learn how to do, it's how we come together as humans that matters.
That's all for this episode of AI and You. Please leave a rating and comment and share with your friends. Get the book Artificial Intelligence and You and see more videos and articles at aiandyou.net. That's aiandyou.net, where you can also send us your questions. Thank you for listening.